And thank you all for joining today for the Brookings Governance Studies virtual conference on voting rights and wrongs, democracy legislation in the Senate. This two-panel discussion, first two of our most distinguished United States senators, and then outstanding political and social scientists on the second panel, comes at a consequential time in the never finished history of American democracy. Last year, a full throttle assault was launched on one of our most sacred institutions, the foundation, really, of our democratic republic: free and fair elections. A barrage of false claims, dangerous and inflammatory rhetoric, unwarranted challenges, and frivolous lawsuits that led to the violent insurrection in the Capitol on January 6th. And unfortunately, it's not over. That same animus now powers hundreds of voter suppression bills in 43 states across our land. However, we'll talk about this shortly on our first panel. Congress is also tackling the urgent need for electoral and ethics reform with its consideration of Senate Bill 1, the For the People Act, that passed the House as H.R. 1 earlier this month. S1 contains many of the reforms that my co-authors and I wrote about in our new Brookings report just released, If It's Broke, Fix It. While under our Brookings rules, I'm not permitted to endorse any particular piece of legislation, I am free to endorse I don't think our senators will be constrained by that, since the Brookings rules do not apply to them. Even I am free to endorse the moment we're in. It is a historic, generational moment. Its outcome, whatever that may be, will be of enormous consequence for the trajectory of our democracy and our nation. So for our first panel, coming straight to us at Brookings Governance Studies, from the first Senate hearing on the For the People Act, we're very fortunate to have with us both Senator Amy Klobuchar and Senator Jeff Merkley to talk about these issues. As you all know, Senator Klobuchar represents Minnesota and is the chairwoman of the Senate Rules Committee, where she oversaw today's historic, and there were a lot of interesting and surprising moments that we'll talk about on today's during today's hearing on S1. Senator Klobuchar also sits on the Agriculture, Commerce, and Judiciary Committees and has served the Senate since 2006 as the first elected female U.S. Senator from Minnesota. Senator Jeff Merkley was elected to the Senate to represent Oregon in 2008. He serves on Appropriations, Environment and Public Works, Foreign Relations, Rules, where he was outspoken today, and the Budget Committee. Together with Senator Klobuchar, Senator Merkley has led the effort on S1 and was a prominent voice at today's hearings. I've had the privilege of discussing these issues with both of them over a period of years, and I could tell our viewers that there are no two senators who are more deeply and personally committed to government reform and electoral reform and ethics reform than the two who are joining me today for our first panel. With that, I'm going to turn to our guests. Let me remind you all that you will have your chance to ask questions as well. You can submit them for speakers by emailing events@brookings.edu or on Twitter, which we're watching, using hashtag For the People Act. So senators, welcome to Brookings. We're so honored to have you with us. As I noted in my opening, there are more than 250 voter suppression bills speeding through state legislatures, even after the over 60 court cases proved that there was no electoral fraud. We're still hearing that canard and so many others, and even after the violence of January 6th. Can I ask you each to reflect on the moment we're in and your view about the need for Senate Bill 1. Some of the members and the witnesses who are opposed to the bill made something of the fact today that it is Senate Bill number 1. Can you explain also why Congress is prioritizing it? Senator Klobuchar, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you so much, Norm. Thank you to Brookings, and thanks for that great report. If it's broke, fix it. Did I get that right?
You got it.
Okay, good. Thanks to my friend Jeff. And by the way, it's not just leadership out there on camera, it's what he's doing behind the scenes, working so hard every day. The other day, I told him something that had made me happy, and I said, I'm in good mood. And how about you? And he said, this is just the two of us. I will never be happy until we pass this bill. Okay, so that is true devotion to this bill. And so the point of why this matters right now is, as you said, Norm, it's been a year onslaught of attacks on our democracy, culminating in a literal attack on the Capitol on January 6th. And if you didn't think we had to get serious about democracy then, I don't know what's going to motivate you. And as I said 2 weeks later, when we reclaimed that space on the inaugural stage, despite the spray paint at the bottom of the columns and the makeshift windows that we were in front of, that it is a moment where our democracy must pick itself off, brush itself off, and move forward as we always do, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That's what this is about. You cannot have, as Reverend Warnock, now Senator Warnock, which is amazing, from the state of Georgia, said in his maiden speech on the floor, if you want to summarize what's been going on since January 1st, some people don't want some people to vote. And we have a political party, sadly, that doesn't represent all of their voters, doesn't represent people like Trevor Potter, who testified for the bill today, the former Republican chair of the FEC. But you have literally, instead of coming up when you lose a national election like they did, usually you say, what new issues do we need to focus on? What position should we change? How do we change our messages? How do we reach out to people? Their answer is to double down at CPAC and then to say, but let's just lop off some of those voters so we can win. That's just not going to cut it. And what this bill does is to go through these pillars of trust in our democracy and make sure that we literally take the best practices from states like Michigan, Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State, testified today, or Minnesota, other places. Let's make it easier for people to vote. Let's make sure that there's trust in our government by doing things to reduce the dark money. And then let's have some ethics back in our government. And as we have many times, upgrade our laws. That's what this is about. And I just end by saying they had a lot of weird arguments today, Norm, that hopefully we will have a chance to knock down, but that they didn't know the bill. Excuse me, it's been out there for a few years and HR 1 was introduced in January. They could literally have read a few pages a day and gotten through it. The second one was that there's somehow fraud when we know it's more likely to be you're hit by lightning than election fraud. And the third was that somehow this would be chaos. And I'll end with that. Chaos. Chaos is people standing in line for 5 hours just waiting to vote. Chaos is purging people from voting rolls like they were doing in Georgia when Stacey Abrams was up, longtime voters, just getting them, rid of them off the rolls. Chaos is one mail drop-off box for your ballot per county when you have a county the size of Harris County in Texas with 5 million people. Chaos is passing a bill that, according to a conservative circuit court, literally discriminates with surgical precision against African Americans. And chaos is the voters in Wisconsin standing in the rain in homemade garbage bags just trying to vote. That's chaos. Chaos is what you saw on January 6th at the Capitol. And what our bill does, as you say, is fix it.
Senator Merkley, over to you for the moment that we're in, the necessity for Senate 1, and why the Senate is prioritizing this as the very first bill. Oh, and Senator, you'll need to remove your mute.
Thank you. Norm, our founders had a very radical proposition which was that power would not flow from kings down, but from the people up. And the thing that symbolized that was the ballot box. And that is just the pulsating heart of our republic. And we've been fighting over that ballot box for 200 years. We had to fight to get the 14th and 15th Amendments passed that took care of some of the barriers for members of minorities to be able to participate, and the 19th Amendment for women to be able to participate in the ballot, the 1924 Indian Citizenship Act for Native Americans, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and we really thought we'd achieve this vision where we all understand that every citizen gets to participate. And here we are in this moment where there are multiple strategies trying to really corrupt the election system at the heart of our democracy. And one of those is cut people off from the ballot box. We know how easy it is to manipulate election day to make the people you don't want to vote stand in line for 5 hours because you don't have very many precinct voting places, or you understaff it, or you put bad equipment in it, or you give them wrong information about where it's located. We know that. And so therefore, vote by mail, automatic voter registration, early voting are central to stopping the barriers that are put up to prevent people from voting. And throughout our history, this strategy has been directed against the poor, and particularly against Black Americans. It's a significant form of systemic racism. And now we have all these voter suppression laws piling on around the country, trying to do that very thing, block the ballot box. So we're in the fight to protect that. We take an oath to the Constitution, we're going to defend it. And then there's other assaults. And one of them is gerrymandering, which attacks equal representation. And we all have a stake in what Congress looks like, not just the people from our own state, but to know that there's integrity in the other states, which is why the founders put into the Constitution a clause giving our ability by law to be able to set the terms and conditions of voting for senators and House members, because we all have a stake, not just the integrity of our state, but of every single state. And then the dark money. Hundreds of millions of dollars that we don't know where it comes from. You and I make a donation, a couple $100 to a candidate, we are disclosed. But if a multi-billionaire gives $10 million through a PAC, they're anonymous, and you don't know where those attack ads are coming from. So we are defending the very foundation for what makes our republic a country that serves the vision of government of, by, and for the people.
We're going to dive into those three pillars of Senate Bill 1 of the For the People Act: voting, campaign finance, lifting up small dollar donations, and ethics. And as you say, they're tied together. All three go to the core of the American idea, which is that our country is an expression of every individual American. And these are three different ways, whether it's if your vote is blocked or there's a barrier, if your voice is drowned out by huge dark money instead of small donations being amplified, and if the people you choose get into the White House and run willy-nilly all over the rule of law and the ethics rules, they're not abiding by the will of the people either. So we're going to get into those three pillars, but I want to step out. Senator Klobuchar told us that wonderful story about Senator Merkley, and I want to ask each of you, so deeply committed to this piece of legislation, and we could see it when we watched today. I want to ask each of you if there's a personal moment from your careers or your lives that informs the work that you're doing on S1. Just to, before we dive into the policy, just to humanize this effort that you're embarked upon for our viewers. And Senator Klobuchar, we'll start with you. And you have to unmute again.
I fear that I've sentenced Jeff to never act happy now until we pass the bill.
He's a happy warrior.
I know.
He's a happy warrior.
I'm afraid. From emotional standpoint, you think about what this bill means when you stand with John Lewis, the last public event he had on that bridge in Selma, and the scar on his head and what people went through just to be able to keep that right to vote. From a personal standpoint, just my own experience, and I know Jeff has that, of being stopped by big interests so you can't pass sensible bills like background checks for guns or do a climate change bill, like something that, renewable electricity standard that was passed in Minnesota with Governor Peleni's support, but we couldn't get it done because of big money in politics. And then just from one last amusing thing I'd say, as someone like Jeff that doesn't come from money, when I ran for office, I know this about Jeff because when he was campaigning for Senate, I went out there and helped and was in his car with him. And he, in the last week, was driving around with a crack in the windshield. And I called Schumer. I'm like, you got to help this guy. He actually might win. My own personal story is that the office I ran for, county attorney that I had, you could only get up to $500 and from an individual donor. So when I start running for Senate, no one will call me back nationally. They can't pronounce my name. I finally just give up and I go through my old address books and other things and I call everyone I know in my life. And that is when I set what is still an all-time US Senate record. I raised $17,000 from ex-boyfriends. And as my husband has pointed out, it's not an expanding base. And so when you come from that kind of place where you didn't have a lot of money or you couldn't put your own money in a race, that makes it real, that you believe that people should be able to run for office that don't have access to big bucks.
I could raise a great deal of money from my exes, but only for my opponents. Senator Merkley, what's a personal moment for you?
I was thinking about how I just loved the vision growing up of a republic where, because every citizen has a voice, you end up doing the things that really are meaningful for families to thrive. Education, healthcare, housing, living wage jobs. And I came out of high school in the mid-70s, and my parents would talk about how they'd gone from living in shacks in extraordinarily difficult conditions, including during the Depression, my grandmother being in a railroad car, and the huge leap forward. I thought, think about what's going to happen in our lifetimes as we build on this foundation of the 3 decades after World War II. And what I have watched is that as the power in our election system has changed, we have failed to create those foundations for families to thrive: healthcare, housing, education, living wage jobs. And I thought, we have to fix these things before my kids are out of high school. And then they got out of high school. I thought, before they get out of college, and now they're out of college. And I wrestled last year with whether to run for re-election because the Senate is so broken, so controlled by powerful interests, and thought, if I run again, I'm going to do everything I can to make this place work. And it's kind of like those signs that you put on wagons, and when people were going west, it was like Oregon or bust. In this case, it's reform or bust. We have to protect the election system. We have to fix the broken Senate where Mitch McConnell has a veto over every good thing we try to do.
The time is flying by. I'm going to do a little bit of a personal lightning round, and then I'm going to open it up to some questions from the audience. Senator Klobuchar, a quick highlight and low light of today's hearing for you.
Well, I would say the low light was just all the things that were said that were not true about this bill, the implications that somehow people who weren't citizens would be able to vote. That's just not true. Or the implications that it was not okay that people who have served their time and are no longer in prison, the people of Florida voted to allow people with felony convictions to vote under those circumstances, including a whole bunch of Republicans. And then just the untruths about fraud and those kinds of things, which we've heard before. I'd say some of the best moments were seeing Attorney General Holder back. That was nice. Seeing Jocelyn Benson stand up for the simple idea, the Secretary of State of Michigan, the simple idea that you can get all these things done, that she just completely debunked these stories that the state couldn't do it, because she did it in a year. And then finally, as I noted, Trevor Potter, as a Republican, to come forward and say this is not going to necessarily help one party or the other. It just helps people to vote. Actually, Republicans won in some of the states where they had high voter turnout, states like Montana. So I just think those basic arguments that we were able to refute their arguments, that was my low and my high point.
Senator Merkley, what about you?
Well, the issue of automatic voter registration came up quite a bit. And Ted Cruz says this is a deliberate strategy to allow millions of non-citizens to be able to vote. And then Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State of Michigan, who implemented automatic voter registration, I was able to ask her, how many people in Michigan did this expand the vote to? And she said about 250,000, 250,000 people. That's a really cool thing. 250,000 people who hadn't been voting have been tied into the system. And then I said, and so as people have looked closely at this, how many people have they found who were not eligible to vote who voted? And she said, 0. Well, certainly it shows that Ted Cruz's attack, that this is about enabling people who can't legally vote to vote, is just an enormous big lie. And it also shows the power of reforms to enable people who have been boxed out or barriers have been constructed to keep them out, are able to participate when you knock down those barriers.
I was also very struck by Secretary Benson's testimony. She's a Brookings author. We've published her here at GS, and Senator Klobuchar's daughter is going to be making law school determinations. She's a Harvard Law School grad. I'm not lobbying.
I see.
I'm not
we'll
lobbying,
see.
Senator.
I'm not getting involved in her life right now. She's a grown up.
With that, I'm gonna ask one last one. Then I'm gonna take our questions are coming in, and the first one will be from Ron Brownstein at the Atlantic. I would be remiss if I did not ask this question. There's been a lot of conversation about how the Senate is or is not going to come together in your caucus, will or will not come together around the bill, and in particular about the fate of the filibuster. We'll have much more on this on the second panel, but will S1 be the bill that is the filibuster buster? Senator Merkley.
You should let Merkley go first, and then I'll go.
Senator Merkley.
So I'll tell you, I don't know how it's all going to unfold, but I believe this: all 50 members of our caucus believe in the vision of every American participating in our government and want to strike down the barriers. And so everyone's making valuable contributions. And we realize that this effort to enhance, strengthen the vision of government by and for the people is going to be fought all out by the powerful forces across the aisle. And so that means we will have to take on the McConnell veto. I don't like to call it a filibuster because the filibuster implies somebody's on the floor talking, they're doing it in the full light of day. No, this is just a veto by Mitch McConnell over legislation that is in the service of our Constitution and the rights of Americans all across our land. So the two are intertwined. How this will be resolved, 50 of us will be in a caucus room. We'll wrestle with all the pieces of it. We'll develop a plan. We'll all buy into it, and we'll go forward and make it happen.
Senator Klobuchar?
Yeah, I agree. I am in favor of getting rid of the filibuster. I think it was, and I think that we're going to have to figure it out. Even Senator Manchin has said that he's in favor of a talking filibuster, which would mean they'd have to put their money where their mouth is and actually stand up and object and speak. To me, when I listened to this hearing today, it just brought home how important this is and why we can't just let everything end up on the cutting room floor of the Senate when people have clearly voted for change. I listened to some of the people on the other side talk about the fact that, well, it was a pandemic. So we let some people vote in a different way and it worked. Well, why would we now close the door? It was proven that the vote by mail that was for the first time brought out in a big way, that people didn't have to get all those notary signatures to get a ballot. And now we're going to say to them, yeah, you can do that once, but not again, even though it's a safe way to vote. It makes no sense unless you want to make it hard to vote and hurt our democracy. And so for that reason, as we look at the importance of Senate procedure, I think it was again Senator Warnock who said, what are we more worried about? Protecting minority rights of some guys sitting in the Senate? There's a lot of guys, sorry, Jeff, or protecting minority rights in our country? To me, the answer is obvious.
Thank you. And now we'll take the first question from Ron Brownstein at The Atlantic, a shrewd observer of these matters for many years. In light of state suppression efforts, he asked, and I'll direct this to one senator or another, would it make sense to strip down the bill to voting rights, voter registration reform, and limits on gerrymandering, the skinny version of the first chapter of the bill? Senator Merkley, does it make sense to chop this bill up, or is there an organic logic to it?
Well, there is a strong logic to it. And as the House wrestled with this bill, there were folks who said, well, we're not quite sold on the idea of a small dollar program. Others who said we're not quite sold on addressing gerrymandering. But then they looked at the composition of the whole and they said, well, I might not buy into every piece of this. I buy into 95% of it. I know it's going to be a vast improvement for America. So it welded everyone together in the effort, and that's essential to retain.
Yeah, I would say the answer to that, Jeff, is decades of doing nothing on campaign finance reform or voting, not responding, as this Congress has not done, to the sophisticated nature of the way people are messing around with the campaign laws, undermining congressional intent, and not responding to the new force there, social media companies who've made tons of money off of advertising. And the Honest Ads Act, which is one of 9 bipartisan bills in there. This is a bill I have with Senator Graham, previously with Senator McCain's bill, that requires them to put disclaimers and disclosures just like radio and TV do when you run ads. And so to me, we have not done anything for so long, and that's what brings this bill together. It's getting at clearly major problems that must be addressed.
And we're almost out of time for the first panel, but I'm gonna do one last question. I'll start with Senator Klobuchar from Dan Weiss. Are there any GOP senators that might support efforts to remove impediments to voting or other parts of the bill? I know you've been such a strong fighter for bipartisanship over your entire career, Senator Klobuchar. So we'll start that one with you.
Well, of course there are. There's 9 bipartisan bills in here. And I mentioned one of them. Another one is backup paper ballots. That's a bill that Secure Elections Act that Senator Langford and I did together, along with Senator Graham was on that bill, then Senator Harris, Senator Warner played a major part in that bill, and Senator Burr, the 2 heads of the Intelligence Committee. And I've had a number of Republicans come up to me and said, oh, I hate the way some of those states didn't start counting until after the election. That's legitimate. It created confusion. Some of them were red states, some of them were blue states, some of them were in between. And so that's in that bill to make sure that we start processing ballots. So you never know until you get a bill to the floor. And I guess one way to end my answers here is because we have the gavel for the first time, thanks to those incredible people of Georgia who defied all expectations and voted for 2 incredible senators in Warnock and Ossoff. We have the gavel and we have the opportunity to have hearings like this to get the bill to the floor and begin the debate. We didn't even get to that point forever before this. And I thank Jeff for his work.
Senator, I'm going to come to you for the last short one, a follow up on that from Jared Applewhite. If SB1 does pass with few or no Republican votes, is there a risk of politicizing democracy reform issues for which Senator Klobuchar points out there's actually broad popular support?
You know, I was thinking about how during McCain-Feingold, where the goal was to put a limit on what each person donated to make sure there was a vision of equal representation, so many colleagues across the aisle said, no, we don't like those amounts to be capped. We want disclosure. And then after Citizens United, and after they were benefiting from hundreds of millions of dollars of dark money, they're like, oh, those big, powerful folks, they don't want disclosure, so we just can't, their money funds our campaigns. We can't do that anymore. And then when this was introduced last time, Mitch McConnell pulled in his caucus. I've been told this by Republican senators, and said you can't sponsor this bill. You heard this in Mitch McConnell's testimony today, where he essentially dared his members to not support the bill. You cannot support this bill. And so that pressure from the outside forces funding the campaigns and from Mitch McConnell means that those who share this goal, this vision of protecting the ballot box, of equal representation, are under tremendous pressure not to do so. And it's not yet clear that there is any single profile in Courage where with those pressures are going to join us on the bill as a whole. Certainly the door is open. Amy and I would love to have the conversation. We're going to reach out to Republicans across the aisle, but that's the lay of the land that makes it of diminishing probability that we will have a Republican vote in support of the bill.
I want to thank you both for joining us today at Brookings, for your leadership in the Senate, in our nation. This is not only a domestic issue. The whole, as a foreign policy person, I know the whole world is looking at these questions to understand the future of the United States. So thank you so much for being with us. We'll look forward to having you back, and we'll be watching closely for the next developments on Senate 1, the For the People Act. Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, Norm. Thanks, Jeff. Bye.
Thanks, guys.